was growing up in the motherland, I was always forewarned not to mess with those mounds of dirt that almost rise up to my knee. And usually they're in the middle of an untrodden land, usually a barren land, and we call them nuno sa punso. I was told I can get cursed by the beings that live in it, and to top that, kids were warned not to even point the finger up close or from a distance because there were circulating stories that someone had a stomach ache or their fingers got swollen from pointing. Today, we will be chatting about the disease causality in the Philippines called Namaligno or bewitched, and how in the modern times we still have remnants of these belief system. And listen till the end. I'll talk about a bonus topic called pasma. You probably heard pasma from your mom or from your lola, so stick around till the end. Are Filipinos truly bilingual? We use the same language at home but speak and love languages foreign to each other, together but separated. Kamusta? I'm Rowan, licensed psychotherapist mom, immigrant twice, first generation Pinoy raising my mixed Filipino-American children in America. I found that after visiting 500 Filipino homes, I continue to be a student of the culture. In this podcast, we would be seatmates in this beautiful cultural classroom. And by the way, did I tell you I need my kaping barako straight from Batangas before each class? If you're interested in learning the deep intricacies of the Filipino culture, especially as it merged with American culture, talks about trauma-informed care, and deepening your Filipino relationships across generations, which includes my fave topic, Pinoy love languages, you're in the right place. Did you guys know you can leave a voicemail and a review? This would help others discover this podcast, which has an important message. And you already know that because you've been listening. So thank you. And the message is to teach the common language we Filipinos need to unlearn and relearn. And I like to call those Pinoy love languages. I'd be so happy to hear from you and share your voicemail with others. So go scroll down as you're listening to this podcast. Look for details, and at the bottom, there's in a place there where you could click leave a voicemail. Also, if you want to keep learning about Filipino cultural nuances, go snatch the Speak the Pinoy Love Language free webinar. There you would understand this cultural clash that's happening in our Filipino homes and how to begin to transform your Pinoy relationships. All the links in the description are in the show notes. Hello everyone, kamusta? This is Rowan. I want to welcome you to the Pinoy Love Language podcast. Thank you for listening to my voice. I'm always curious what you might be doing while listening to me. Often I'm driving and I sometimes fuss when the traffic starts to get more fluid because I wanted to keep listening to a podcast I'm truly engaged in. So I hope that's your experience here. So welcome. Let's talk about Namaligno. So bewitch, you might have an idea just simply from that word, bewitch. But Namaligno is this belief system that a supernatural being, it could be a bad spirit, it could also be like a duende, almost like a dwarf leprechaun, and many other beings, supernatural beings, and that the maligno is like they've possessed you or they put a curse on someone. So I grew up in Manila, which one would say is the most cosmopolitan part of the Philippines. And even there, you can observe the duality and the way Filipinos seek help for their ailment, for their diseases, going to the doctor or going to get tawas, which I'll talk in a minute. So one of the things that you would observe is that many Filipinos go to the doctor not as a preventive measure. That is still something we're trying to evolve to. In America, we have well child exam that has certain timeline for our children, and the same for adults in general. You might go to your doctor twice a year, see your dentist for cleaning twice a year. In the Philippines, perhaps the rich and the very educated are already starting to do this, but I could see that still not all of them, because it's not so much about information and education, but it's anchored from our belief system as Filipinos. So sometimes we're even thought to have the religion of folk Catholicism, which is the mixture of the supernatural and the Catholic teaching. Of course, not all Filipinos are Catholics, but a huge percentage of us are. But we also have different religion in the Philippines, born again Christians, our Muslim brothers and sisters. So in rural areas, especially, there are not a lot of doctors, right? Or psychiatrists. I forgot the ratio as far as like one psychiatrist for every 200,000 Filipino. It's said that we only have a little over 500 psychiatrists in the Philippines and mental health workers with a ratio of 2 to 3 per 100,000 Filipinos. So you could just imagine the lack of resources and also the overlay of the stigma of reaching out, especially when it comes to mental health. So let's just go back to I was mentioning in rural areas, there's not enough doctors, there's not enough psychiatrists and mental health worker. What is a Filipino to do? Let's say you're in a province and your son is acting in a way that you could not comprehend. And as I mentioned in the other episode, as science is still trying to penetrate in certain countries and cultures, our human need to explain phenomena remains. We have that. We want to be able to explain things, to embrace stories so that they are passed on to the next, or at least explained to oneself. And this is where the belief of Namaligno is fortified. So if someone is, let's say they pointed to this mount of dirt, right? And the next day they have a sore finger, it makes sense, right? Rather than going and seeking out a doctor, that you would explain, that's right. What did you do yesterday? Did you point to that nunu sa punso? That's the reason why. And when you have a reason, when you have a sort of a diagnosis that's brought about by your behavior because you were not supposed to point to that mound of dirt, but it gives the person, the community, the family a way to then treat it. So if you're na maligno, what can we do? So in different tribes, different, subculture, cultural groups in the Philippines and different belief system, there's different ways that they are doing this. Some do an offering of animals like chickens. They just slash the neck of the chicken. My apologies if this is a little graphic, but then they make that as the offering with white or bigas rice that's not been cooked. And there are many ways, but the belief is that you have been diagnosed that you did something you weren't supposed to do, and then that leads the family, the tribe, to then be able to address it. So this is why it's helpful when there is no other explanation that one can give for a sore finger. Alongside with that, tawas, if you've heard of that, many manghihilot faith healers use this as a form of part of their treatment. It's part of diagnosing what's happening. So I remember as a child, I've been to manghihilot quite a few times. That sounds a bit weird, I know, manghihilots. But and I remember the manghihilot putting oil in a banana leaf and trying to locate the lamig, the cold patches area on my back. And that's the way they diagnose, or at least one way. Now, I'm not an expert as to the specifics of tawas. I do know could also answer questions, as they would put, let's say, candle wax and let that drip in a basin of water. And it's believed that the faith healer has the ability to see things not commonly seen by us normal people, and that they are guided by spirits. So that's tawas. And let's talk more about how this plays out in real life. Let's talk about Linda and her pouty lips. This is a case scenario. So here's Linda. She's a tourist in the Philippines, and she went to this calamansi farm. And she was told that, she could roam around, do her thing, but to not point. So she was forewarned by the farmers, and that if she needs help picking any of the calamansi, that she could just go ask for help. So Linda is a very talkative lady, so she was chatting with her friends, and because she was having a good time, she kept pointing at things. The very next day, she woke up with a very swollen lips. And so Linda asked her friends, like, "Oh, I wonder what happened to me." And her friends, who were all from the islands, asked her, "Were you pointing? I think you were pointing, and the farmers were telling you not to point, right?" And so they made the conclusion that's probably it, that the maligno or some spirit didn't appreciate Linda's pointing. And because she was very talkative, there you go, that she has a swollen lip. Sure, Linda could have gone to the doctor, but sometimes also out of embarrassment, people might accept such explanation that, yes, I think, all I need to do is go to a faith healer and do the tawa so that they can then relieve me of this symptom of having a swollen lip. And so that's what Linda did. So she met a faith healer who did the tawas, and the faith healer actually was able to say, "Oh, I think you stepped on something, or you pointed to a bad spirit, and the bad spirit didn't like that." And so she was given a cream, a special cream concocted by the faith healer, and she went home, used it for a week, and that was it. And she became a believer. This must be really a maligno. And as you're listening to me, I do not have information as to believe in it or not to believe in it. The mind is so powerful. And so I leave you with the space to accept it or not. But the point is, when we accept certain stories, that sometimes we do our own self healing, if you will. And it's true that faith healers, even therapists, could be instruments to our own healing, but in many ways, we are indeed healing ourselves. It's interesting that I'm using this case scenario, swollen lip of Linda. And many times when I was growing up in the Philippines, they told me not to point. It's probably, and I'm not saying that this is the reason why, but maybe perhaps one of the reasons, or my theory, why Filipinos like to point with their lips, right? They're not using their finger, because even talking to an elder, that would be sort of a dishonor. A dishonoring gesture to actually point to someone. And I would catch myself actually telling my children, don't point to other people. Curious if you've done the same. I think in general we don't want to point to people, but are you a little bit more cautious, and when you're talking to your children, no, don't point to that person? And are you familiar with your mom pointing with her lips? And we're probably all not conscious as to the causality of pointing with our lips, but because I've heard this story so many times of not using your fingers to point, I think the Filipino is very creative, right? And we find other ways to point. And why not the lips, right? Up next If you're in America or in the diaspora, and if you have someone who don't want to access care as far as like just going to the doctor or seeing a therapist or a coach, because they think that it came from something supernatural, and what to do in that case, and how do you encourage someone just to be curious about other ways or form of healing. But first, just a quick break. Diyan ka lang. This episode again is brought to you by the webinar Speak the Pinoy Love Language. If you haven't watched this webinar will show you the difference between Filipino and American culture, and we begin to transform your Pinoy love relationships, whether it's with your kuya, ate, mom, or with a romantic partner. Check out the show notes for the link. Don't forget that the 5 Pinoy Love Language ebook is available now. This ebook is easy to digest but gives you an understanding of the unique ways Filipinos express love, deepening your cultural identity and understanding, but ultimately understanding you in your Filipinx relationship. Check out the links in the show notes. Welcome back. So, what if you have a friend and your friend has been going through some panic attacks, and this has affected her work, and she rarely goes out of the house for the fear of having a panic attack? And in your assessment, you really think that she should see a doctor or at best a psychotherapist, but your friend prefers to use alternative forms of healing, for instance, energy healing, let's say Reiki healing. What would you do in that case? So here's my recommendation. My recommendation is to listen to your friend. And the reason why I'm sharing these episodes around disease causality is not to be in a position where you're like, I caught you, I know what you're thinking, this is why you think you're sick, but really from a coming from a place of compassion, of understanding, knowing that they are accessing different forms of healing because it works for their psyche. And if you take away anything from this episode, is to listen to their story, and the type of feeling that works for a person is the one that they believe that would heal them. So if your friend does not think a doctor or a psychotherapist could help her, chances are they would not help her. If you want her to be open to a different form of feeling, and I understand that because many times we do need to be seen by a doctor. When I'm seeing someone and there's some physiological symptoms of perhaps an exacerbated mental health symptom. So if someone's very depressed now, they have really bad migraine, or they can't sleep, I want them to actually be checked by a doctor first, because I care for that person, and ethically that's what we want. We want the type of care that I'd want to get from a practitioner, I myself, and that's the same care I'd want to give anyone. So I understand, as a friend, you're seeing more perhaps the bigger picture, but the way to really engage your friend is for you to engage first in their interests. So find out about Reiki, why she thinks it's working or not working, and then just sprinkle some information here and there. When you do this, really meditate and really understand and become from a position of being curious, whether you're able to convince your friend or not. You just want to know where she's coming from. And just the position of that is when you listen, they're able to also listen to your own recommendation. Also, it can coexist. Different forms of feeling can coexist. One could be doing Reiki, and that's wonderful, that's working for them. And one could also be seeing a psychotherapist if the client, your friend is willing to blend the two. So when we're talking about namaligno or any type of disease causality, that's my hope, is that you are trying to figure out why this is working for them. And if it's not working for them, anchor from their experience and sprinkling information based from the images that works for them. So if they constantly talk about energy, use their language. Don't use your language because you're already encouraged and motivated by what you want to recommend. Also, anchor from that language if that works for you. And if it doesn't, find a medium or a median language in between. So, as promised, I'm going to do a bonus topic on pasma. So, pasma is this belief that if we don't balance cold and elements, which is came from really the Chinese type. So, as promised, let's talk about pasma. So, pasma in many Asian cultures believe that hot and cold elements need to be balanced, and if they're not balanced, that can cause some mental health issues. It can cause diseases. So when your mom said, "Nako," and I'll translate this, "Huwag ka munang maligo. Kung kakauwi mo lang, mapapasma ka." So if you've heard the advice, don't take a shower first, especially if you just came from work, right? Your feet has been in your shoes for many, many hours and you have to give it a break first. There's this belief that it's too hot in the shoes and then you want to air it out first to balance. Or one would say, especially if you've been playing outside, it's sunny, it's hot, you've been sweating, then you go into the air conditioner, that don't do that. That's going to make you sick. Now, among all the disease causality, I think pasma has some medical backing, right? It kind of like makes sense not to go in and out of a cold space, especially if you've been sweating. Now, I'm not a medical doctor, but there seems to be a plausible scientific backing when it comes to pasma. So let me give you a case example. This case example came from the journal of Abad et al. And his friends, and it's titled Disease Causality in the Philippines. So here's a 30-year-old female who just delivered her first child via a C-section. The delivery was complicated by severe blood loss and late postpartum hemorrhage, requiring several blood transfusions and prolonged hospital stay. 14 days postpartum, the patient complained of uncontrollable emotions. She was admitted with impression of a postpartum psychosis. Assessment revealed a family history of depression disorder. During admission, a family member asked, "Kaya po ba siya nagkaganyan ay dahil po sa pagligo niya pagkatapos manganak?" So, is the reason for her condition a result of taking a bath after giving birth? And a family member answered, "Siguro napasok siya ng lamig. Probably a cold air entered her body." So that's a scenario, and that's a common scenario. I remember growing up, we had a house helper and she's from the province, and each time she has her menstrual period, whether that's 5 days or 7 days, she would not take a shower because of the same belief that cold air would enter your body and go into your brain, to your head, and could cause you to be crazy, quote and unquote crazy. So in this example, the explanation of pasma can possibly hinder the access of care. They did access care, but it would take some convincing to explain to them that it actually came from a different causality, right? Postpartum psychosis, as the case stated. Just the same, a culturally responsive provider can really provide counseling to the patient in the language they understand. So, in summary, I think I've repeated myself a few times. If you were listening to the episode on disease causality, is to honor people's story. Ask them questions before you start recommending. We believe in something because it gives us explanation. And for some people, just the belief system that there is a cause and therefore I can do something about it by, say, not taking a shower, and that's easier than taking medication or talking to a psychiatrist, going to the doctor. There is a reason for that. And it might not be the best treatment. You and I might agree on certain aspects there. But the truth of the matter is, to convince someone is to really listen to them first. The truth is that they can coexist. So we don't have to negate everything they believe in. So instead of saying, nako, wag kang maniwala dyan, that's totally a myth. You can just nod your head and just validate. Oh, I see. You think that you are having these symptoms because you gave birth and you took a bath right away. Is that right? So you're just making them feel heard and giving them maybe a different type of explanation so both can coexist is the main takeaway in the segment of this episode on disease causality. So I hope that's been helpful. Please don't forget to leave a review or a voicemail to this Filipino therapist. I hope this has been helpful wherever you are. I hope you've been well, and sa uulitin, again, this is Rowan. Bye-bye now.